Oireachtas Committee on Fisheries and Maritime Affairs, and I'll advise you that we are in public session. And before we begin and get into the business of the meeting, I need to bring a number of items to the attention both of witnesses and indeed members. So witnesses giving evidence from within the parliamentary precincts are protected by absolute privilege in respect of the evidence that they give to the committee. This means that a witness has a full defence in any defamation action for anything said at a committee meeting. However, witnesses are expected not to abuse this privilege and may be directed to cease giving evidence on an issue at my direction as Chair. Witnesses should follow the direction of the Chair in this regard and are reminded of the long-standing parliamentary practice to the effect that, as is reasonable, no adverse commentary should be made as against an identifiable third person or entity. Privilege against defamation does not apply to the publication by you outside of the proceedings held by the committee of any matters arising from proceedings. And to our members, I'd like to advise members of the constitutional requirements that members must be physically present within the confines of the Leinster House complex in order to participate in public meetings, and I'll not participate a member to participate where they're not adhering to this constitutional requirement. Therefore, a member who attempts to participate from outside the precincts will be asked to leave the meeting, and in this regard I'd ask any member that is partaking via Microsoft Teams that prior to making their contribution that you'd verbally confirm to me that you're on the grounds of the Leinster House campus. And members are also reminded of the long-standing parliamentary practice that you should not criticise or make charges against any person or entity by name or in such a way as to make him, her or it identifiable, or otherwise engage in speech that might be regarded as damaging to the good name of the person or entity. And therefore, if your statements are potentially defamatory in relation to an identifiable person or entity, I'll direct you to discontinue your remarks, and it's imperative that you would comply with any such direction. I think all of our witnesses have been before this committee in recent weeks and months already, but you are very welcome back to discuss marine protected areas. I think at this stage you know the drill. We will hear opening statements from each of our three sets of witnesses. And I'd ask you to give brief, maybe 2-minute summaries of those. They have been circulated to members and they've had an opportunity to read them, but just to allow for extra time for questions and answers and for getting down into the detail, I'd ask you to summarise over 2 minutes. And what we'll do then is we'll open it up to members and we'll take 10-minute blocks, and each member will get 10 minutes, and within those 10 minutes is to include both the question and the answers, and there'll be a bit of back and forth. And I would ask witnesses in particular, I'd ask members in particular to specify to which set of witnesses they wish to direct a particular question, just to ease with the conduct of the meeting. And I'd ask witnesses then if there is something that you disagree with or something you want to raise in relation to evidence that has been provided by another set of witnesses, that you do that through the Chair rather than responding directly to something somebody else has said. So I'll introduce our witnesses and then we'll kick off with the opening statements. So we have representing the Marine Institute, Dr. Rick Officer, Chief Executive, Dr. Ciarán Kelly, Director of Fisheries and Ecosystem Advisory Services, Dr. Oliver Tully, Team Leader Inshore Services, and Dr. Francis O'Brien, Section Manager of Licensing and Policy Advice. Representing the Irish Islands Marine Resource Organisation, we have Antuas Lenda Keneally, Las Cahirlach, agus Antuas Seamus Bonner, Rooney, and representing the National Inshore Fishermen's Association, we have Antuas Michael Desmond, Cahirlach, agus Antuas Ivan Toole, Stewart. So to fall to Rove Gillair, I'd ask the Marine Institute to provide their 2-minute summary, and just to note that there are clocks around the various parts of the room just to keep an eye on the lever though. Thank you. Dr. Officer.
Thank you, Cahirlach, and thanks for the invitation to meet with the Joint Committee today. So I'm joined by my colleagues, you've introduced them, Dr. Ciarán Kelly, Oliver Tully, or Ollie Tully as he's known in the industry, and Francis O'Byrne. The statutory remit of our agency is written there in our opening statement. We welcome the opportunity to discuss the important work that this institute undertakes and our scientific work particularly relevant to MPAs. We're awaiting legislation to expand the island's MPA network, but whilst we await that legislation, it's certain that the implementation of MPAs needs to be informed by a robust evidence base and robust science. That requirement for that evidence and science is consistent with the Marine Institute's broad statutory role, and that is to provide evidence, scientific evidence, and technical expertise that can underpin good policy decisions, robust management of our marine resources. So the work that we are proposing to summarise today and to discuss with you is across 3 broad areas that can ensure that MPAs are implemented based on robust data and sound science. Those 3 areas are around the scientific advice and ecological sensitivity analyses that we've been involved in, the monitoring and assessment activity that we've undertaken in Natura 2000 sites, and in the habitat mapping research and mapping efforts that have been used to define areas that are now protected, particularly areas offshore. Our contribution is all about providing the evidence base through data collection, analysis and expert advice that will enable Ireland to meet its biodiversity commitments whilst balancing the sustainable exploitation of our seas. As the legislative framework for MPAs develops, the Marine Institute is ready to contribute to the eventual policy direction through providing science-led solutions. We've a written submission to the committee today that further elaborates on these key areas of activity within the Marine Institute, and we now welcome your questions. Thank you, Cahill.
Thank you very much, Dr. Officer, and I'd ask now for the Irish Islands Inshore Marine Resource Organisation for your opening statement, please.
Thank you, Chairman, for the invite. Myself and Seamus, our Secretary here, I'll go through these rather swiftly. Where islands in particular have a historic connection with the sea. They're, all their life is linked to the marine in some way. There's traditional knowledge of fishing, seaweed farming, all that kind of stuff that we don't want to lose. And this intergenerational thing where we need to actually pass that on in a form where people will actually remember it rather than having to relearn everything again. Now again, as Dr. Officer says, we're awaiting legislation. We don't really know what's going to happen. A lot depends on that. It has to incorporate safeguards for all those things. We don't know the structure of it yet, so we have to see. One of the big problems with the small-scale fleet, island fleets, is we can't move. So if you find yourself in a marine protected area, or particularly in a no-take zone, you're finished. So that's important. We're following the UN FAO guidelines on small-scale for fishing. You know, tenure is very important for us. In the light of all of these, we've been in that area for a long, long time, so we need it. With the UN, we are kind of essentially an indigenous group at this stage, and we'll be wiped out soon. Now, there's environmental threats, industrial fishing, certain forms of aquaculture, pollution, runoff, all those things have to be dealt with. The recommendations that we would have at this stage is that we include traditional knowledge in the MPA management. We need legal frameworks for co-design and co-management, so nobody is left out in the cold. And we've been involved in this Make Fishing Fair roadmap, which we've added to your stuff there that we presented. I think my time is up, so if there's any questions, we can come back to most of those again. Thanks.
Margaret Thosel Keneally, and from the National Inshore Fishermen's Association, please. Thanks
very much for the invite, Chair. Ireland's coastal waters support a diverse and predominantly small-scale inshore fleet, typically composed of vessels under 10 metres and operating within 6 nautical miles of the shore. It is essential to assess potential socio-economic risks to these inshore communities. Irish small-scale fisheries are characterised by spatial dependency, seasonality and strong cultural ties to coastal heritage, making them particularly sensitive to spatial restrictions. Small inshore fisheries play a substantial role in Irish coastal identity, and potential MPA impacts include the loss of intergenerational fishing heritage in communities where fishing is a cultural asset, reduced community viability, declining recruitments of young fishermen, exasperating ageing fleet trends, the erosion of local ecological knowledge, which has historically guided sustainable inshore practices. These factors may contribute to depopulation and economic contraction in already fragile rural coastal areas. Irish fishermen have repeatedly expressed concerns regarding top-down decision-making in marine spatial planning, insufficient early-stage consultation during MPA designation, a lack of clarity on allowable gear types, seasonal access or adaptive measures within proposed marine protected areas, perceived inequity where small inshore boats face the strictest restrictions despite their comparatively low environmental footprint. NIFA now feel that a 6-mile limit has been introduced, whereby the largest vessels were those over 18 metres in length in the Irish fleet will be restricted from operating inside the 6-mile limit, so a 7,000-kilometre stretch of coastline has been protected. This is a massive marine protected area that has the backing of the vast majority of inshore fishermen and should provide dividends, and it should also go a long way to reaching the 30% target set by the EU. Any future MPAs to take up the remaining percentage could perhaps take place in Ireland's offshore waters to balance both sectors. If extra MPAs are to be put in inshore waters, it has to be done with stakeholders' engagement, that is, inshore fishermen and their representatives, both NIF and NIFA, meeting with officials from the Department of the Environment before anything is finalised.
So we'll open to questions now. Deputy McLaughlin.
Yeah, thanks, Cathaoirleach. And this committee has, sorry, not this committee, but this Oireachtas has previously engaged with the first draft of the bill, and that's I'm just going to get the document here. Yeah, so the committee was Housing, Local Government and Heritage, and it came under the planning aspect of their responsibility that time. And that committee drafted a report in February 2023. I recall it well because they actually had made provision for some of the fishing organisations to meet them in private session. Unfortunately, not intentionally, but there was an oversight where they, remarkably, you were going to have the fishing organisations not being consulted upon about something that would have such an impact. So they did have a private session, and they then drafted the report, as I say, in February 2023. And I'm just going to draw attention to a number of recommendations. There are a total of 45 recommendations, but two, I think, are very, very important. And I'm looking here at Ivan Toole from the National Inshore Fishermen's Association. I believe, because these things are interconnected. So if you look at that marine space, you have the offshore renewable energy, you have the fishermen, inshore and offshore, and you have, of course, environmental campaigners who, are looking to protect the marine space. So you have stakeholders that all must be respected equally. But when it came to offshore renewable energy and designation on the East Coast, I believe it was disastrous. I think it was appalling how fishing communities were treated, and it's led to all sorts of legal battles. I do believe lessons have been learned from that, but too late for the East Coast. But in terms of the rest of Ireland, there is a DMAPS process. There is the Offshore Renewable Energy Seafood Task Force, which looks to bring people around the table and find common ground. So that's the sort of scene setter that leads me to this recommendation, which is crucial. So that committee, the previous committee, engaged with the bill at that time, and they said, recommendation 25, the committee recommends that the MPA designation process should be based on the principle of co-creation. This is really important, co-creation, whereby all relevant stakeholders are involved in the designation process from the earliest possible stage to ensure that all sectors concerned are considered during designation. Now, I'd be strongly recommending that our committee push for that. But I just want to get your thoughts on that. So why the word co-creation? Because what's happened again and again is fishermen or other stakeholders are presented with a fait accompli. That's where it's going to happen. And that's not respect. Co-creation is where everybody's at the table from the very start. And the issues that are raised by both the islands and the inshore in terms of actually, being a threat to their safety, where you squeeze people into tighter areas that is dangerous in terms of the conditions and the needs that they have. So this co-creation issue, I just want to get everybody's view, all of the contributors actually, on the issue of co-creation. And do you agree with the principle of co-creation? Would you be recommending that? So when I talk about co-creation, to be clear, I'm talking about the fishermen, of course, all the organisations that could be impacted. The environmental campaigners, that's fine. That they'll have their interests, and offshore renewable energy. That you have a full picture. You have a full picture of what's happening. You're in the helicopter looking down, the full picture of the whole seascape. That it's done in a way that's has the least possible impact on struggling fishing communities, but also achieves the goals, which could be very, very good, actually, in the long run for fishing communities if it's handled well. So just to get people's thoughts on that. So, Chair here, I'll just ask you whoever you want to take first.
So we might start with the Marine Institute to respond to Deputy McLaughlin's questions, and then we'll go to IIMRO and then in that order, if that's okay.
So, Deputy, thank you for the question. We're in a difficult situation. We don't have a legislation here that's guiding on how this will be delivered from a policy perspective. I understand the committee has a scheduled meeting with officials from Department of Climate, Energy and the Environment in the new year, which will shed some light on their approach. My understanding is the approach to that legislation was adopted just in the middle of November, and that it is looking to use the existing Maritime Area Planning Act to amend that act to essentially deliver MPAs through DMAPs. So I think probably the approach that's been adopted now for the delivery of the national DMAP for ORE is indicative of the approach that we would expect government to take for delivering MPAs. So that approach has included a public participation statement, which really articulates how government intends to engage with stakeholders throughout the process, which suggests that your imperative around co-creation, co-design is to the fore. Just from our own perspective as an agency, that approach is part and parcel of the way our institute does its business. Particularly, we have a very strong relationship with the seafood sector through the Irish Fishery Science Research Partnership that enables that regular good engagement. So I would expect it to be maintained. The Institute's quite comfortable in this domain. We would see our role as essentially, it's a very difficult space, but our role is essentially to provide the data and evidence that will enable a good engagement, good discussion in the sort of fora you're articulating.
Thank you. The response from the fishing organisations.
Thank you. Yeah, IIMRO. And
thank you, Chairman. Thank you, Deputy, for the question. I think that the main point that I would see here is that whatever plan comes up has to be adaptive, that you don't have something that some civil servants will run for the next 40 years. You need to have whatever we have to be adaptive, that you can change it. Now, there's a few things there that come up with the relationship with the Marine Institute. Yeah, we're involved as much as possible with them, but some of the studies we've been asking for is to do with the pollock in particular and various other species, that we need to have more focus on the inshore habitats, to have a look at that. We've had some experience with other areas where there are co-management. If Seamus might like to outline some of those for you. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. And just in relation to co-design, I think that's crucial, really. There should be a legal framework, in our opinion, to enable that in the legislation, because if the legal framework is not there, it's not going to happen. And we're at a stage now where the legislation has been worked on, so if we can maybe incorporate that into the law at this stage, that the co-design is done in partnership with the communities that are going to be affected by these designations. And, you know, we've put in our opening statement that we need a national maritime plan, really. It's not to do it piecemeal, not to do ore, not to do MPAs, not to do fossil fuels as separate processes, but to have an overall vision. And crucially as well, one of the points is, you know, we need the designations to come at the end of the process, not at the beginning. So you mentioned fait accomplis and that. I think that's been the experience with the likes of the special areas of conservation and special protection areas, where not only does it weaken the environmental objectives, but it kind of has long-term impacts on the communities as well. So co-design is really important, and there are good examples in other places, like we mentioned Galicia and Catalonia in Spain. They're probably 10 or 15 years ahead of us, and I think they would be a good example to look at as part of the work of the committee. Thanks.
Thank you. An opportunity for NIFA to respond. You can go over a minute or two there.
Engagement in co-design is going to be crucial from the very, very beginning. Like, we are very much afraid of what's coming down the line, but we don't know. All we hear from the NGO point of view is stopping fishing, stopping fishing. Like, from our point of view, an MPA, first of all, would be to stop pollution. We've got 40,000 seals taking 200,000 tonnes of fish out of Irish inshore waters, and there isn't a word about it. And no take zones for us, if that came into the MPA, that would be the end for inshore fishermen. There's lads up in your area now, already got a phone call a couple of weeks ago that the biggest brown crab buyer there in the northwest has stopped taking brown crabs in the run up to Christmas, and this is the third time it's happened since COVID, and they haven't a whole lot else to go at if no take zones came in on top of that for the other stocks that they'll try to diversify to. Like, it will be the end. But as for what's happening at the moment, it's the opposite to them being, like, there's raw sewage, there's chemicals being pumped into our waterways. What's going on the East Coast, the fish stocks have dramatically, the shellfish stocks have dramatically decreased, whelk and brown crab. But Ivan would be a lot better at talking about what's going on there than me if he wants to take over.
Yeah, I could. So since we've had, as Pádraig pointed out, we've had an awful lot of surveying for offshore wind in our area. And we have a big whelk fishery on the East Coast, which is a sea snail, if anyone that doesn't know. But since 2001, I suppose the fishing has all but collapsed. Particularly this year, all through the summer, the lowest landings that's ever been recorded in like 43 or 4 years of whelk fishing. We would tie that directly to the surveying that was done, seismic surveying and geophysical and geotechnical. So we've big problems on the East Coast, and we've more to come. So I mean, my worry of the MPAs will be the sincerity of the areas that are being chosen for them. You know, will they be where the wind farms are being designated, or will they be around them? Will they be in other areas? We've seen firsthand, you know, what happens when fishermen are not involved with these decisions being made. So I would be very concerned going forward.
Senator Boyle.
Thanks very much, Chair. Thanks everybody for coming in. And first to say, you know, I think all stakeholders, fishermen and everything, should be involved in this. You know, it's only right. I mean, the fishermen knows the sea, and they know the coastal areas. So I think their input is very important into this, especially for habitats. And you know, at the end of the day, they're the men out there. They're men I know for 50 and 60 years is out fishing in coastal areas, and they know exactly what's there, and that all should be fed into the plan. Rick, you said the legislation is still not there. How far away is the legislation? Or, you know, are we a year down the road, or are we 2 years? You know.
Senator, I can't really answer that question because that's a matter for the department that will be the sponsor of that legislation. So it's really should be directed towards DC when they come into you in the new year.
Right.
I suppose what I do understand about the approach that's been adopted is that they're trying to amend an existing piece of legislation, which is the Maritime Area Planning Act. That provides for the consultative processes that we've just talked about. Whether or not that expedites the delivery of that legislation, I'm not so sure. You know, it's an amendment rather than new primary legislation here. So I suggest that's a question that you direct to DC when they're here before you in January.
Right. I know that there's no place, as I would say, shovel-ready, as there for windmills off the coast at the moment.
So, sorry, Mr. Studd, no what?
There's no one farm shovel-ready to go off the coast of Ireland at the moment, is there? Or, you know.
So the phase 1 projects are going through the planning process.
Right.
So they were the East Coast when it was a developer-led approach. Since then, the government have adopted a plan-led approach, and just last month they had a successful auction for the first of the concessions down in off the Waterford coast. So there's no immediate metal going into the water in any of these wind farms. There's a long way for the developers to go before they.
And what consultation was done with, let's say, the fishermen and the stakeholders down there, or do you know?
So again, that's really a question for the department who were convening that consultation. What I understand is that they went through a very extensive, lots of stakeholder meetings. They formed a liaison group and appointed fisheries liaison officers. So there's quite some difference in the approach adopted for the South Coast DMAP for ORE than existed for the phase 1 projects, which were developer-led.
Just on that, maybe you can't answer, but I mean, there's bound to be other countries like Denmark and Holland that has done this in the past. You know, can we take did they follow the protocol of talking to fishermen, of taking their advice, or did they just go on and do it? You know, just put up the windmills and then didn't consult nobody? You know, that to me is totally wrong. I think no matter what happens here, every man has to be consulted and everybody's input has to be listened to. Because, I mean, for generations, there are people fishing out there in coastal communities. And if they're going to be kind of pushed to the wayside, that to me is totally wrong.
So I can't answer easily for what went on in other countries. You know, I am aware that there have been some approaches that didn't include a great deal of consultation. But I do understand that under the Maritime Area Planning Act, which is the piece of legislation being used in Ireland, it requires consultation.
Yeah. Just to come to Seamus, you mentioned a marine plan there. Like, I think that would be a very good idea. Could you elaborate on that for me?
Yeah, just from our kind of work with maybe other organisations in Europe and other countries, especially some of the Nordic countries like Finland and places like that, that's the approach they took, where they talked to everybody. Find out what's been proposed. They look at the culture, the economics, the environment. You know, it's all looked at as an overall picture, and then as part of that process, then they put the structures in place. So it's not just a once-off consultation. That there's ongoing input, and you mentioned the expertise of the people fishing daily on the water. that's, I mean, they spend more time than anyone on and around the water. They have a lot of knowledge, and I think the experience is if you blend that with the science, that traditional knowledge that's been passed down, you know, you get a better outcome for the communities and for the environment as well.
Yeah. No, well, I do think even moving forward, like communities and fishing communities, like if there goes 1 mill out there, if everybody agrees, there should be a constant feedback into the community. That's putting up a 1 mill, and then these big companies take the money, and there's no feedback back into the communities. I think it's totally wrong. I mean, this should be sustained, that it comes back into the communities for the sake of the communities. You know, that would be my idea. But what do you see as the rest, you know, pollution-wise and stuff? You know, there was a mention of pollution earlier on. You know, surely when a 1 mill's up there, there's not much that can go wrong with it, as there are. Whoever wants to take it.
I wasn't talking about wind farms, Deputy. Right. I was talking about there's landfill sites there with toxic waste going into the rivers and going directly into the bays. There's one actual an energy company there in the Waterford estuary, well, up the river in the Waterford estuary, and some nights you can see up to 2 feet of foam and suds coming down the river. The boats from Duncannon up don't have to put anti-fouling on their keel anymore because nothing grows on it. There isn't a cockle, a barnacle, a mussel, nothing up the river in the Waterford estuary. And all we hear from the NGOs then is to stop fishing down further. They're like, that's going to help. But it's up to the state or the EPA to stop those chemicals going into the estuary in the first place. Yeah. But all we hear about constantly is that fishing is the problem. But we feel that's not the case. Like the most vital thing in an MPA is to protect the health of the water. And at the moment, that's not happening. What's going on the East Coast, and it's the state is behind it, seismic surveys, which all NGOs will say when it's happening for oil and gas, it's a big no-no. But when it's been done for wind farms, it's no problem. There's drilling, the most powerful underwater drill in the world, hypersonic viper cord as it is called, is drilling 80 metres under the seabed drill holes down through shellfish habitats on the East Coast, and the whelks and crabs have disappeared. But there's not a word about it from the environmental associations. We hear that the whale numbers on the south and the East Coast have gone down compared to the way they were a few years ago. Now, what I've seen in my time fishing off the southwest coast in the 1980s, I never saw a whale. You know, they're saying now it's because of the decrease in sprat, which is rubbish because there's plenty of sprat there, that the whale sightings have gone down the southwest coast. But all the boats were herring fishing in the 80s and 90s because the price of herrings were good and there was no need for boats to go sprat fishing. But I never once saw a whale off the southwest coast in the 1980s. In the 90s, there was just a few pilot whales, and then at the turn of the century, here they came. Fin whales, humpback whales, every type of whale for 20-odd years. Yeah. You could have been days out prawn fishing south of Cape from dawn till dusk, and I've seen a dozen to 20 whales in one day. And now those sightings have gone down, and in the Kerry coast, the sightings have gone up. Now, what has happened? In the 80s and 90s, there were seismic surveys being done for oil and gas, the Kinsale gas fields. Since the sightings, then it completely stopped, and for 20 years you had whales and dolphins everywhere. Now here we are doing it again, and the sightings are going down again. Like, the word science means observation based on facts. Like, do you really need a scientist to tell you what's happening and what wind farms are doing in the East Coast? Yeah.
No. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. Deputy Ward, 10 minutes.
Okay, thank you. I want to thank you all for coming here today. I'm just going to get right into it. All organisations, this is first questions first. Do you agree with the government's decision to drop the MPA bill and instead amend the 2021 Marine Area Planning Bill? And what do you believe is the most important amendments any of the organisations could make to this? And that is open to all organisations?
We might start with the Marine Institute, as we've just established that order, and then we'll
Okay,
go to
that's
IIMRO
fine.
and then NIFA.
So thank you for the question, Deputy Ward. It's not a matter for the Marine Institute to have an opinion on what's essentially government policy. Our role is to, whatever their policy is, to proceed with, assisting in the implementation of that policy. Again, our role is about providing the evidence base there to support good decision making in the marine maritime area.
Okay. Anybody else?
Yeah, thank you, Charles, Deputy. Yeah, we don't really know what was in the other bill.
Yeah.
So it's very hard to comment, and even the new legislation, there's talk that it's going to fit into the MAP Act, and that's going to be amended, but we haven't seen or heard of what the amendments are going to be or when it's going to be implemented. I think mid-2026 was mentioned at one stage, but at the moment we're kind of in the dark really about what's going to be, what form it's going to take and how. And you're asking about recommendations. Like one of the things we've been talking about for a while is the lack of data on inshore and small boat activity, where they fish and when they fish, and all that information is missing from the official kind of data sets. So there's a big gap there that needs to be filled, and I think an obvious way of doing it is talking to the communities that are
Involved.
in those areas that they're thinking of designating. Thank you.
Mr. Keneally.
Thank you, Chairman. I refer back to Senator Boyle's question on pollution. There is some information available on problems with the actual windmills in the sea in other jurisdictions now with microfibers blowing off them. They interfere with certain radar signals. You must also remember that when you add all the costs of the mining that's required for that, the Norwegians in particular are getting involved in offshore mining. So there are two sides to all these stories. The prawn grounds in the Irish Sea, well, when you nail a whole load of these into the seabed, the prawns won't move, and then fishermen can't fish them there. But there are problems that we don't look at anymore, and it's from a scientific perspective. I think those things do need to be looked at and not ignored, So that's all I'd like to say about that. Thank you.
Okay.
NIFA.
Yeah, we're in the dark about it really, like the previous, but we can't really comment till we know more. But again, engagement will be key with us, like the Department of the Environment in particular. We've had no meeting with them as such in the past 3 years. Okay. So it would be, before anything is finalised, just to have a chat with them, would be very important.
Okay, yeah, I'll move on. Next questions are I've got 3 questions for Enda and Seamus. What has been your experience as a stakeholder consultation so far? Do you feel it's been productive, and has the Minister been engaging? That's the first question. So if you want to take that one.
Thank you, Senator TD Charles. Our experience to date hasn't been great. We've had some consultations, but we've largely been ignored. We find that dealing with departments and various agencies is an uphill battle with everything we're doing. They seem to think that instead of helping, they tend to find as many reasons as they can for making things awkward. As regards the offshore ORE, consultation has been on for a long time, and we found some of the other things that we're involved in, like the Brexit trade deal stuff. Our opinions were ignored. It's the same with some of the inputs we have into various dealings with the, say, the Icelandic deal from the Commission's perspective, and from Ireland's thing, our position hasn't really been noted. We were against allowing Iceland into Irish waters. It was pointed out that there was European waters where, whichever waters there, we don't think that you should reward a track record of taking more than you should by giving you access after the fact, you know. And that's another thing that would be interesting to look at, is how quota is allocated in this jurisdiction. It's a public resource. A number of years ago, with the Island Heritage Bill that was pushed through, and it failed due to a money message or some other advice from the Attorney General, which nobody can see that it was contrary to the CFP. But we checked with the Commission before that went through, and they said it wasn't. So, you know, this kind of has to be looked at again. I think we've made a point in our submission. And there's a thing about this Make Fishing Fair roadmap as well, which is tied into UN protocols. I think the short answer to your question is it hasn't been a great experience. Thanks.
Would you like NIFA to answer that same question?
Yeah, do you know what I'll do? I'll come back. I'll get Seamus now. I've got one for Seamus here.
Great.
So, how do you think the management systems could work in the likes of IIMRO if the MPA were introduced around the island? How could we ensure the islanders and the fisheries are properly involved? For Seamus.
Yeah, thank you, Deputy. Yeah, I think the point about co-management and co-design of the marine protected areas is crucial. The communities that are affected by any designations are the ones that need to be consulted, because they're going to be the ones that are going to make it work. And if the community is not on board, or they feel that they've been not listened to, it's going to make things a lot harder, and you're not only back at square one, but you're back further than square one. So I think that ongoing consultation with the community, having a structure there where the community, the scientists, and the fishery managers are working together to come up with plans, and if those plans work, well and good. If they don't, they can be adapted or they can be changed. That would be key for us to see that.
And do you see any issues, difficulties in establishing or managing the NPAs around the island, and the impact it would have? It's also, how would you see this if you were planning this forward? What would your vision of this be?
Yeah, I mean, there's upsides of marine protection. It's in everybody's interest to keep, the environment in a good condition, because, that's what makes places like IIMRO nice places to live. It allows you to make a living on the sea and everything else. Our thing is, I suppose we're often surprised that the first instinct is, what restrictions do we need to put in place, instead of, why is this a wild place? Why is this place working?
Yeah.
Instead of, putting more restrictions as the first option. I think that would be one thing that we'd recommend to try and do.
Thank you.
Thank you, Deputy Ward. Senator Wilson? You okay? Deputy Cahill? Okay. I have a number of questions. I may take them at this juncture. The first relates to that concept of co-creation and co-design, and it's particularly to NIFA and to IIMRO. I heard Mr. Bonner, you mentioned co-management, and my question is around that management piece. That we're obviously discussing what the legislation will be, what the process will be, and what ultimately the MPAs will be. But when they come into existence, what role would you like to see for inshore fishermen, in particular, in managing those? And do you see that there could be a role for, we'll say, out of season, at different times, working on the management of those? And I'll put that both to NIFA and IIMRO, and then maybe hear from the Marine Institute. In terms of the experience of other countries and your organisations in a similar basis to you that provide advice, scientific advice on the maritime environment to their respective governments, how have they approached this question in areas where they have instituted MPAs or something similar? I believe in North America that they may be a little ahead of the curve on this. And have they participated in the management of those MPAs, and have they sought the input of fishermen into the management of those MPAs? So I might go to NIFA first, if that's okay.
Definitely, like, it goes without saying, you know, we have to be, we're the one group that's going to be affected as fishermen, so fishermen should be involved with the department, you know, from the very, very beginning, the Department of the Environment. Like, they have to have, you know, I know all stakeholders need to be, but I think us in particular need to actually have a sit down, you know, a day speaking about this, because it's huge, like, you know, it's huge. 30% of our waters is pretty significant. Like, for them to tell us what to do afterwards just isn't going to cut it this time, like what happened with the wind farms. And the actual design of, like, our idea of an MPA, I'll give you an example, the brown crab working group that we spoke about here. There's 2 meetings last year. It hasn't met now in 12 months. That's fishermen looking for a management plan for a fishery. At that, and there was overwhelming support from all the POs present, we asked for pot limits to be introduced. You know how that there's each fisherman is allowed to use X amount of pots, rather than one fella bringing in thousands and fishing out an area fast. And the biggest, everyone at that group that was representing fishing organisations, the RIFs, the NIFs, NIFA, IIMRO, everyone wanted that. And the biggest block was the SFPA, because they said, how could it be policed? Like, it's policed in Tasmania, Australia, New Zealand, America, Canada, Norway. There's pot limits everywhere. And to have a successful pot fishery anywhere in the world, you know, pot limits were introduced. In particular, the brown crab fishery, because the amount of inshore fishermen that have been pushed into that fishery. But other things, like, fishermen have taken it upon themselves to protect the waters. Like, where I'm from now, Roaring Water Bay, there's a successful shrimp fishery there for last my father and uncle would have been one of the first 2 people in Ireland to shoot shrimp pots. And here we are now 50 years later. And that fishery is as good now as it was then, because we use screens to return the small shrimp straight away within seconds of them coming aboard. And the fishery lasts. Velvet crab fishery, we have our own managed, there's 65 millimetre is the length of a velvet crab, but we all go 75, because you get a higher price for the bigger crab, plus it's stock regeneration. You know, with lobsters, we V-notch them, return the biggest and return the pregnant females and the underside. All of this was industry-led. We have the methods if we're just involved from the beginning, but no take zones, that's a completely different thing. If that happens, like, where do we go? If say the BI fishing now is closed in the morning, that's it, I'm gone. Same for every other fisherman around, but maybe Ivan wants to add to that.
Yeah, I think the key for me, and is involvement of the fishermen, because I know you have scientific data, but I don't think there's anyone who knows the waters better than the fishermen who works them areas. And I've seen firsthand what happens when fishermen aren't involved with stuff like our first engagement with wind farms, like was maybe in 2019, we were approached by one of the companies who had picked an area to look at development of a wind farm, and they asked us to meet them in the local hotel, which we did, and they had a presentation up on the board, and they introduced themselves, and within 2 minutes they said to us, this is happening, lads, you need to get on board. So I mean, we've seen firsthand what happens when fishermen are not involved. So I think, anything to do with marine protected areas needs to have a high involvement of fishermen. I think it's critical to identifying areas as well, because even this minute I can think of several areas along the east coast that would be perfect for marine protected areas, for and would work for everyone, not just fishermen.
Thank you. And the same question to IIMRO, around co-management as well as co-design and co-creation.
Yeah, I think going back to our earlier point about the legislation, it needs to be included in that, in the upcoming amendments to the MAP Act, to allow for that process and those structures to be put in place, as well as the resources. So it's not just a once-off, this is the legislation. You need to have to resource the meetings, the travel, the time of people with the expertise who are going to manage the fishery. That's very important as well. Like for us as a small organisation, we have been, taken some initiative. We've worked with Trinity College Centre for Environmental Humanities on governance, models. Our members have been involved with a DNA study on lobsters off the Aran Islands. We've been involved recently with a VMS project for vessel trackers for small boats called FishX. It's a Horizon EU funded project. And Enda mentioned about our request through the industry science research partnership to look at inshore habitats. So we are trying, we have very limited resources, but we're trying to maybe get ahead of this so that, we can participate properly when it does arrive. But there's a lot, I suppose, from government and the state agencies as well that they need to put in place so to allow us to do, what we can't do as well.
Thanks, Mr. Bonner, and I agree with you in terms of processes and structures, but also the resources to facilitate that co-management, and to Marine Institute in regard to international experiences, and also working with the sector to monitor, manage, update, change the advice and these MPAs.
So, Kahilak, as you can hear, I'm not from around here. So I might come back to the first part of your question around international experience. I have some particular personal experience from having worked within Queensland and how the Great Barrier Reef Marine Park operates and has operated for both its design, implementation and continued operation for 50 years now. I'll come back to that. What I might do is just handle first the second element of your question there around consultation. Stakeholder engagement is actually, crucial to the proper delivery of this. The approach of adopting the MAP Act and amendment to it now designs that in. That's going to need good vehicles for delivering that consultation. And what I'd like to do now is just defer to my colleagues, Dr. Kelly and Dr. Tully, to explain how this Irish Fisheries Science Research Partnership operates and how it's of great utility to the consultation that will be required here. So maybe Dr. Kelly first.
Thank you. So in relation to this IFSRP, that's a committee that was established under the Minister for Agriculture, Food and Marine. It's chaired by the Marine Institute. It's attended by the Marine Institute and BIM Bord Iascaigh Mhara, our sister agency, and it's represented by producer organisations. And the function of that was established essentially to create a vehicle in order to basically hold the science to account, for want of a better word. So we're involved in monitoring and assessment of marine fisheries resources. We meet on a quarterly basis. We've extended out that meeting profile for next year. In fact, we hold a workshop also as well on issues of interest to the fishing industry. And it's a forum where we can get down to talk about brass tacks, essentially. And when I say brass tacks, you know, Ivan from NIFA spoke about the fishermen on the ground and what they see, and that's a lot of what we go through in those consultations. And then we also have to explain the science in which we're conducting as well. So that's an important part of what we do.
Could perhaps Dr. Tully could introduce some of the particular projects and engagement that are particularly relevant to our colleagues here in the inshore sector?
Yeah, thanks. Just to follow up on what Kieran said about the Science Fishery Partnership. In the case of inshore fisheries especially, we also engage with the National Inshore Fisheries Forum and the Regional Inshore Fisheries Fora around the coast in terms of consulting and discussion about possible monitoring and management measures for shellfish fisheries, which the inshore fleet strongly rely on. So there's a strong engagement there. On particular projects that we have at the moment in consultation with the industry, and it goes back to your question on what the possible future role of the industry could be in monitoring and management of MPAs. So we don't obviously monitor or manage MPAs as such at the moment, but our work with them on monitoring of fish stocks and shellfish stocks in particular involves, in fact, we're completely dependent on them, and we have various contracts and relationships there with the inshore sector, the use of commercial vessels, getting data directly from vessels to provide the evidence for monitoring of fish stocks. So I think that's an important, there are a number of frameworks that we have in place there that are important in delivering evidence directly from the sector into the science space.
And Kahila, could I come back to the second part of the question, which was around the international experience? I'm going to answer that question without prejudice to a policy position that may be adopted in this country. It's just purely experience of having seen this in another country. So I worked for several years within the state of Queensland as a science leader for fisheries and aquaculture. About 70% of the state's fisheries, so we have an enormous state, about 20 times the size of Ireland. One of the world's largest marine parks, about 2,000 kilometres long. About 70% of the commercial fisheries catch in the state of Queensland comes from within the Great Barrier Reef Marine Park. There are everything from no-take areas through to areas that are where there's beam trawling for scallops. The marine park has been developed over many years in very tight consultation with Indigenous communities, Torres Strait Islanders, Aboriginal communities, and also lots of engagement with the fishing industry and its subsectors. So that's resulted in a mosaic of different forms of protection within the marine park to achieve all sorts of conservation objectives, but also social and economic objectives are very important. They range from the Indigenous rights of individuals and communities that have been living in that area for millennia through to current day.
Thank you, Dr. Officer, for that. That's fascinating and very interesting. It leads me on with the indulgence of the other members of the committee, because we'll get into a second round of questions here, but I may as well put it because it's on a related theme. The idea of a mosaic of protection measures within an MPA is one that I find interesting, because as has been said here, I think just to pick out two things that our witnesses have said, where do we go? You know, if the MPA or no-take zones are put right on top of fishing grounds used by the inshore sector, where do we go? And I think it was Mr. Keneally said, well, you know, if you can't move an island either, you know, so we have to be careful in how we approach this. So I'm interested in hearing from the three sets of witnesses very briefly, maybe your take on seasonal and select access and how that might work. So select access in terms of the type of fishing activity that could take place, the type or scale of fishing activity, and boats that might be able to access, and indeed obviously seasonal access. It speaks for itself. So maybe to hear from the two fisheries organisations first, and then from yourself, Dr. Officer. Thank you.
Again, very good point. And in the brown crab working group, that's exactly what we said. And it's a full backing again of the regional inshore fisheries and the national and all POs, but not a blanket season like that Donegal, Cork, Kerry, East and West Coast, that it all closes down at the same time. But you could do area seasonality. Like that if, you know, fellas in the southwest wanted to stop crab fishing in November, December, January, but in the northwest, you know, if they were buying at that time, that they closed down at a different time of the year, so that within the processors they would still get the product all year round, but there'd be breaks in the different areas around the coast. Was something that came up in conversation, like, and that group needs to get going again, and then that group could then feed into the Department of the Marine or the Department of the Environment afterwards if we do ever get to have meetings with them. But if what they're going to do is just using the DMAP process without consultation, it's not going to work, you know.
Thank you. And IIMRO?
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, just a couple of points, and I agree with Michael there on the seasonal fishery practices. It's a thing we've been promoting and trying to get back to through the Heritage Bill that we mentioned earlier. The other kind of important thing would be for us, in line with the FAO guidelines, that customary rights, you know, that these are fishing grounds that are important for communities, have been used for long generations, and that they have to be recognised, that there's tenure there, and that's an international guideline that I think we should model our legislation on. And the other kind of thing for us, that there would be preferential access for low impact fisheries in the inshore areas, that's really important. We've seen recently where the pollock fishery, the handline fishery for pollock, was closed, and it's the most low-impact fishing practice that you have, and it should be the last thing to close, really. Instead, it was the first. So those types of things need to be addressed, as well as the designations and everything else.
I forgot something there, on the seasonality. There's actually proof of it working as well. If you look at the shrimp fishery throughout Ireland, before that was almost a year, all year round, and now they've closed it from March to August to allow the shrimp spawn, because they've got a short life cycle, only 2 years. And whereas boats were fishing during the summer months before, they've stopped that now, and they don't start till the 1st of August. Majority of boats bring the gear in then just after Christmas, but it is open till March. But they closed it during spawning season. And here we are 50 years after started, and it's as good as ever. So it can be done, but again, in conjunction with it, but it's just an example to use.
Well, if ever there was an argument and an example for co-management and fishermen knowing their fishery and being trusted with it. Dr. Officer.
So thank you. I'm going to defer to Dr. Tully here to address this question.
Thanks, Rick. I suppose it's important to consider in the designation process in designing MPAs, it's really important to have a clear objective. So the objective of designation in the first place and what you're trying to protect in there, whether it's a particular species or a particular habitat. Once you design that, once you define what that objective is, then you can discuss and start to discuss the select access or designing access arrangements around that. And there are a lot of examples already of designed access within the existing network of protected sites around Ireland, which are the special areas of conservation, where we have let's say, no restriction on static gears and some restrictions on mobile gears, and also no-take zones for very sensitive habitats. So there are examples in the system already about how to design selective access in relation to different fishing gears.
Deputy McLaughlin.
Thanks very much. So the National Marine Planning Framework has been in place now for a number of years, and I want to get a sense, because IIMRO have talked about, and I absolutely agree with them, around a national marine plan, just looking at everything, every single activity that's taking place in the marine space, to have a proper picture. I talked to my earlier contribution about being up in the helicopter and getting the helicopter view. So just, Rick, if I could ask you or your colleagues, in terms of the National Marine Planning Framework, like how would that framework, as it's currently constituted, would that do the job that IIMRO have suggested, or is there a need for a look at that again? Because anyway, I'll say no more, just ask the question here.
So the Institute's been heavily involved in the National Marine Planning Framework from the off, in providing some of the baseline data to help define it. Importantly, the planning framework is designed to be comprehensive, and it's designed to look at environmental imperatives, social and economic imperatives. So it is intended to be comprehensive. The National Maritime Area Planning Act gives life to that planning framework. The first designations of DMAPs were around ORE, so perhaps there's been some confusion that this was all about ORE. But I think the approach that's now being adopted by government and delivered through the Department of Climate, Energy and Environment is about extending that approach to other marine and maritime usages. So we're now seeing that in the proposed approach coming forward for MPA designation through amendments to the MAP Act. So I think we have a comprehensive framework that could deliver the whole of Ireland approach that you're speaking about.
And well, that's encouraging. And the sort of mosaic example that you gave from Australia, is that possible within the context of the marine planning framework?
I would see no reason why it wouldn't be possible, but I think we will respond to the policy imperatives when they're clear. There will be particular conservation objectives that will be set, and then it will be up to the scientific community to inform how they may be best implemented. Yeah. That could result in a mosaic of areas that that particular habitat needs strict protection for this reason, but we would really need to see what those imperatives, those objectives are before we could be definitive.
So, I'm very interested in the example of the indigenous people of Australia, Aboriginal people, and obviously IIMRO and the inshore sector here would give examples of the long-standing heritage and tradition in those fishing communities and those island communities, and the need to protect those traditions within the context of a planning framework. So I just wonder, in terms of this forthcoming legislation, is there an opportunity in the amendments to the existing legislation to make sure that the protection of of these immense heritage amenities in terms of inshore and islands fishing communities, that is legislated for, that it's there? I wonder, I appreciate there's a boundary in terms of government policy, but I just want to get your thoughts in terms of international best practice. Okay.
So I answered the Cahilic's question on that particular issue without prejudice to an approach here. It was just really around experience that I have from abroad. I would see no impediment, though, in the approach. It will be up to government to decide whether or not that's a policy imperative or not.
Yeah. So just maybe to invite IIMRO to, because and my colleagues here would know that IIMRO have done a lot of work, and you make the point around the pollock fishery. It's something that I find deeply frustrating, that there was an allowance for bycatch, but there wasn't an allowance for, you know, the most low impact type of fishing you could possibly do. And, you know, and obviously we have the example of Murren Kavanagh, the young woman who has been to Europe repeatedly to talk about just that she was being denied, you know, the ability to fish in the most low impact way, but there was the ability to have bycatch, significant catch of pollock by the larger vessels. So maybe just, Seamus, if I can ask you to just talk about, you know, we dealt previously in this committee with the heritage legislation that unfortunately is still held up. Just to get your thoughts about the European context, and you talked about Galicia and Spain, just maybe to give examples internationally about how this can be done.
Yeah, thank you, Deputy. Yeah, the national, just going back to your point about the National Marine Planning Framework, we've been active over the years. I mean, we try as much as we can to put in submissions to all these consultations, and it does take up a lot of time and resources to do that. It is important, you know, as an overall umbrella that's in place, but it's the implementation then that's going to be important for communities like ours on the islands. We need to look at things like even cross-border interactions, like how it's done in Northern Ireland and the north. They seem to have got a handle on an overall picture, whereas we're playing catch-up, I think, at the minute. In Spain, they've put a legal framework in place to allow these co-management things to take place. The fishermen do work with the scientists and the managers. It is resourced, and there was a lot of maybe skepticism at the beginning, but I think everybody is finding that it's working. It does take a lot of time. That was one of the things that comes across from speaking to people who've been doing it for years. But it's time well spent. It won't change things overnight, but it will in the long run. It's probably the best way, but it has to be resourced, and the time has to be put into it to make it happen. And if, for example, us as a small organisation take the time to put together a consultation submission, that, you know, that those aren't just fed into the bigger system and disappear without, you know, any word or feedback. That's not the way to do it, I don't think.
Thanks, appreciate that. Can I just final comments, Kahira, that as part of our own deliberations on this matter, that we might just look at the examples highlighted today in terms of Spain and Australia, just to see is there anything that we as a committee can utilise as part of our pre-legislative scrutiny. Just also to say that the Minister, in a recent exchange with Deputy Jennifer Whitmore in the Dáil, indicated summer of 2026 before the heads are even drafted, so that probably means autumn or winter of next year. But so we do have time. I think it would be useful just if I could recommend that, Kahira, that we would have a look at those examples ahead of our scrutiny. Thank you, Kahira.
Very good suggestion. Deputy McLaughlin, thank you. We'll certainly do that. Senator Boyle.
Thanks, Chair. And just to come back on a few things, Seamus, I think you're totally right. You know, the Lake Islands, people really needs to be consulted with, and, you know, especially islands. And I think Michael's right too. Michael, you just need to get more sit-down meetings with the department, get your input in there. I mean, at the end of the day, the fishermen needs to be looked after. We've seen in other places where fishermen wasn't looked after and how things are upped it and slowed progress down, you know, and still, you know, there was no winners out of it, whereas a bit of consultation and trying to work together would speed things up. I just have a few questions. What measures would mitigate income loss for small-scale island fishermen if the MPA was expanded? And I know fishermen want to fish. That's what a fisherman wants to do, but that's just a worst case scenario. And what legal framework could guarantee tenure rights for small-scale fishermen under the MPA legislation? Nobody.
Senator, do you want to say who you would like to answer that?
Oh, no, just whoever would answer it.
In that case, if IIMRO would like to come in first.
Yeah, in terms of income, I think there's scope there to allow fishing to continue, you know, on a small scale that we see around the islands, and people to be able to earn an income in their own area. I think that's possible, and it should be facilitated through the legislation. If it's not doing harm to the things that were mentioned, you know, if the features that are being protected within the MPA are not being damaged by that fishing, like a blanket fishing no-take zone is not the way to go in our opinion. And allowing people to continue to have an income would be our preference anyway. Sorry, the second part of your...
It was what legal framework could guarantee 10-year rights for small-scale fishermen under the MPA legislation?
Yeah, I mean, we mentioned those FAO small-scale fishery guidelines. They speak about it at a high level. I think it's going to depend on the legislation for, you know, the amendments that are going to be put forward by the government. How do you implement that at a national and regional level? We don't have the answer, but I think there's examples elsewhere that you could use as a template to do that.
Right. And in other countries, are you allowed to fish away if there is a one farm, say, a site off the coast? Are you allowed to fish, or how near can you fish to it?
I think in practice it's the exception rather than the rule. It tends to be things like insurance issues that prevent you fishing within a wind farm. So if there's damage done, who's responsible, all that kind of stuff. So it kind of excludes people from within those areas.
Right. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. Are there any further questions? If not, I might, because we have covered a huge amount there, but I might give a couple of minutes to each set of witnesses if there's any closing statement you'd like to make, if there's any issue that you'd wished to raise but you didn't have the opportunity to. So we might start as we started at the opening statements and go to the Marine Institute.
Thank you, Cahill. I'll defer to each of my colleagues. I'm conscious that Francis O'Byrne hasn't had an opportunity to speak as well. Just regard to Senator Boyle's last question regarding opportunities for ongoing income for small-scale and inshore fishing. Just again, I'm answering this from my experience of seeing how this, in a mature MPA set up internationally, the design was around not just ecological imperatives, but also social and economic imperatives as well. The Great Barrier Reef is an enormous tourism draw for Australia and for the state of Queensland. Visitors coming to the marine park, they want to experience the reef, they want to go charter fishing, and they want to eat the local produce in the restaurants as well. So there's actually quite a strong synergy that's enabled there. The commercial fisheries are required to kind of operate to fulfill that seafood market that's demanded in the hotels and restaurants. So a well-designed MPA, there's good experience internationally that well-designed MPAs can deliver on these multiple imperatives and actually create opportunity rather than necessarily deny it. I'll defer to my colleagues here for any closing remarks. Kieran.
Just to draw the committee's attention to the report from, it was Department of Housing, Planning and Local Government. That section has now moved into DC, but they produced a report on MPAs back in 2020. So a lot of the discussion that you have had here, for example, it's outlined here in the recommendations and key principles around MPAs from that report. Early and sustained stakeholder engagement should be integral to the selection and management process for MPAs. And the engagement should be inclusive and equitable, and the process should be designed to be ensured that it's transparent, meaningful and facilitating. So they're already enshrined in the kind of principles that have been laid out. And if you look at that, I'm sure you'll get some comfort that it's heading in the right direction. Maybe Ollie wants to add some more.
I just want to reiterate what Ollie was talking about the knowing what the actual qualifying interests in MPAs are. It's hugely important because then you can properly assess the likely effects of particular activities on these, and that will be a good guide in terms of the future direction of that MPA. So.
Thank you.
Thank you. And IIMRO.
Thank you, Chairman. Just a few points onto Dr. Officer's point on the Great Barrier Reef. That's a huge area, and we should take the best things from that, probably. And this, what we were saying is, once you have a coordinated area, you could have different. I mean, Ireland, there's so many bays that could have different protocols and things in place for that. And again, as Dr. Tully was saying, we have to say, what are we protecting exactly and for whom? So, again, closing remarks, really, we need to include traditional knowledge in the MPA management, and we need to get a closer link between that and science, because a lot of the science things that I have attended, you always see the scientist coming along and saying that he met a bunch of fishermen who knew that haddock were talking to one another, and nobody believed it until he wrote it down. So no, everybody believes it. So the knowledge is there, you know, and it's just the language of science is done. And when you, as the policy dictates what that's going to be, I think you need to have a kind of a look at that, because you can get a harebrained policy, and then you have to support it with the science. It should be kind of the other way around. But the legal frameworks for code designation, we've outlined those, and there's good practices in other jurisdictions that we should look at and pick the best bits for. They've made mistakes in certain areas and learned from them, so we shouldn't have to make those mistakes again. The US has a lot of these areas, but some of them have been successful, some have not. They, as I was saying, the Make Fishing Fair roadmap that we've been engaged in lately, it kind of in the grounded in the FAO regulations and in what we're doing. So equal participation of the small-scale sector, because they're the vast majority of the fishing community all over Europe, and they need to have that place recognised. And we have to have a blend of traditional and scientific knowledge, really. Another issue that seems to keep coming up is we use track record as a measure. No, people tend to try and build up track record, and that's what happened in Norway, Iceland, Faroes. Once the system is there, people will do it. So we need to relook in Ireland at how we allocate fishing opportunities, that you don't end up privatising a public resource for the benefit of very few people and banks. And you're leaving, what are you going to do with the population? Another point I would like to get back to about the offshore renewable stuff, where you are displacing fishermen, they should be directly compensated from the wind energy park, especially like Mr. O'Toole was saying earlier, they were more or less told this is going to happen and you're going to like it. Well, if they're going to do that, the compensation should go directly to the fishermen that they're displacing. The community funds are a different thing. The community will probably benefit from cheap electricity. I don't know. Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you, Mr. Keneally. Mr. Bonner.
Thanks, Chair. I think Enda's covered everything. Thank you.
NIFA.
Yeah, thanks, Chair. To close, I suppose, the inshore sector is in the mess it's in. You're well aware of the different facts we've brought before you in the last couple of months. Because for years inshore weren't at the table, they were on the menu. And that is why the pelagic court is divided the way it is. That's why we're in the mess we are, because we didn't have representation. And now that we have representation, you know, between NIFA, NIFs and RIFs, it is just has to be done like that. The Department of the Environment have proper, meaningful meetings, not tick box meetings. I suppose there is a huge fear out there amongst inshore fishermen about what's coming down the track. Whether that is exaggerated fear or not, I don't know. But when you see groups like Fair Seas and that on social media telling us about no-take zones, you know, we're wondering where are those no-take zones going to go, who's going to be affected, etc. But the wording marine protected areas, like protecting from what is the question. Like this House brought through legislation to protect basking sharks. Protect them from what? Were basking sharks in harm? Was there someone fishing for them? Were they after them? Was anything happening to them? Absolutely not. They were just out there every day in conjunction with the fishing industry. But since they got protected, what happened? The people that were lobbying for their protection now have tourism businesses taking hundreds of Americans out to see basking sharks every day around the coast. And before they were protected, they actually weren't protected. They were left alone. So that has to be taken into consideration. Ivan wanted to answer Deputy Boyle's question there too, if you don't mind.
Yeah, just on the fishing practices you had asked about, you know, can you continue fishing in these our areas? And we actually done a study with one of the experts from the wind farms, and it's not as straightforward as what you think, because we've an awful lot of tide on the east coast in particular. So we fish long strings of maybe 100 pots, 50 pots, and when we pick up one end, like you can have 3 knots of tide that we haul across. So after we done the studies and tracked our movements, like we can fall back maybe 3/4 of a mile as we're hauling this string. So, you know, trying to fish anywhere that you've placed a static obstacle in the way is going to be extremely difficult. And there's no doubt that the way we fish, the practice, the way we fish at the minute, can't be done in these areas. Maybe it can be done on a different scale, shorter strings, individual pots, I'm not sure. But just what we do and how we do it now is in jeopardy in the future.
So thank you all for your closing statements, and I want to sincerely thank our 3 groups of witnesses for being with us here today as we kickstart our discussions and our examination of the marine protected areas. I know it's a dirty morning out there for travelling. I know some of you travelled a great distance to be here. So I do want to thank you for that, and I realise it's like I said at the outset, it's not the first time either of the 3 bodies here before us have attended this committee in the last couple of months. So we're very grateful for your presence, for your contributions to date, and members. Also, thank you for your questions, your good conduct in putting those questions, for listening to the answers. As there is no further matters to be discussed at today's meeting, this committee stands adjourned until 6 p.m. this evening, where we will be meeting in private session to discuss fisheries quotas. So, Camille Magov.